Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Mia Sosa-Provencio, and I'm a teacher, educator, scholar, Chicana feminist scholar at the University of New Mexico. I prepare people who are getting their license to teach and going through the process, getting their master's as well. And so today I'm going to talk to you about an ethic of care that came from some work that I did with working with a high school, and I call it an in the flesh, caring in teacher education, enacting Testimonio pedagogy within what my participants ended up calling the dimension of schooling to grow hope and critical consciousness. And I co-wrote the paper with an undergraduate student, Karina Dominguez Tarango, who helped me theorize sort of, this was collected over time, and she came to this work in the last year. So the history of education in New Mexico is fraught in so-called Hispanic and especially indigenous communities. Many of the things that I've been hearing across communities resonate because public education has been one of the most forceful and effective arms of colonization in New Mexico for Mexican American, or we call ourselves many things, Nuevomexicanos, indigenous heritage peoples, and also indigenous tribal people of New Mexico. And so since the beginning of public education, we've seen detribalization, language erasure, cultural erasure, all of the things, bodily sort of corporal punishment in school. And so oftentimes when I'm preparing educators, they sort of don't understand why our students of color respond the way that they do in schools. They don't understand the pushback. They don't understand that we are teaching in the colonies. And we continue to do that. Today we are still living these educational histories, of course, right? In New Mexico, students of color comprise the majority population, and yet students are hyper visible in surveillance and criminality, and they are invisible in areas of curriculum. And so we are overrepresented in special education, overrepresented in expulsion, overrepresented in who we call dropouts, right? Students who are pushed out. In 2018, there was a landmark ruling called the Yazzi and Martinez ruling, where families came together and cited the state failing its constitutional mandate to equitably educate indigenous, low-income, Latino students with disabilities in a meaningful way. And so that lawsuit stands. We are urging the state to remedy this, and so far what we've seen is initiative after initiative instead of really looking at the root of curriculum, which is still very colonizing. So one of the things that I know with people who want to be educators is that we can talk all day long about emancipatory, student-centered, social justice, decolonial, anti-racist curriculum rooted in voice and liberation, and yet none of us have seen it in K-12 spaces. We have not experienced it ourselves anyway. Sometimes we see it as adults, but we ourselves have not experienced it. Many of my students, and in New Mexico, people who are pre-service educators are about 55% people of color as well, which stands in stark contrast to the national, which is still about 85% of people who want to be educators are still white and female and Christian and heteronormative and all of these things. So they come from these communities, and yet they sometimes can still reenact the same sort of colonizing, teacher-centric, Eurocentric curriculum. And so I know when I work with students that they have to see it, right? I can't just talk about these things. They can't read great articles only. They have to see it. So I started partnering with a high school, the high school that I actually taught at for 7 years in an area of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that is about 85% Mexican, Mexican American, Mexican immigrant, and also long residing Hispano, Chicano, Nuevomexicano families. So in the school itself, it's about 96% Nuevomexicano peoples. And so I started working with a principal, the principal at the school, And I asked her to work with, if I could work with students who were enrolled in credit recovery. Because if anyone can teach us what we're doing wrong, it's students who have been the most disaffected, who have experienced the most failure, who have been underserved the most. And so we started working with this group of students, and we're about 20 high school youth, and so we started calling it the Curriculum Lab, because we designed curriculum together. We would design it, we would talk about it, my students would teach it in groups. Our high school students would sit back with observational tools and be like, okay, we're gonna debrief now because you lectured too much in the first part. Could you do this? Could you do that, right? They were teacher educators. So it was me and a crew of high school kids who became teacher educators. And my students, we would design, teach, reflect together. So we utilized Testimonio, which is Chicana, Latina feminist epistemology, pedagogy, methodology, which utilizes first-person Latin American narrative genres of struggle and resilience in the face of structural oppression. We see it with Rigoberta Menchú, who is an indigenous woman in Central America who writes using her first-person voice. It challenges notions of narrative because narrative tends to be very individualized in a Western context, and it looks at individual experience as a way to show consciousness of a collective reality. It is very action-oriented, it is very activist, it's very liberatory, it's rooted in voice, but also collective voice. And it really, as Gloria Ansaldúa, godmother, Chicana feminist godmother, talks about, it's to overcome the traditions of silence that we have been taught as women of color, as communities of color, as marginalized peoples, who are living in our land and yet are constructed as foreign others. So some of the work coming out of what we came to call the TCL, we actually engaged the students in not only the curriculum building and the teaching but they also started researching. The lesson plans that we would create would actually engage them in action research. So it was sort of, okay, here's a few articles we're gonna read. I want you to put this in conversation with this, write some poetry, pull some lines from here and there. It was very student-centric. It was very culturally relevant, culturally rooted. And so they were also, on the weekends and during the summer, these same students who were in credit recovery were also participating in a paid agricultural pedagogy workshop with a colleague of mine, and so they were learning about the value of agricultural work, but also their connections to land as a landed, indigenous heritage Mexicano people. And so it was this really great opportunity. So I would also go there and sort of gather their knowledge and their experiences about what it meant to connect with land. And so we would do sort of photo voice with that as well, what they were learning about themselves. It was a way to honor some of the work that their families actually do as well. Many of them come from families who do migrant work. And so it was, let's see. Well, it was an incredible experience to see the meaning that they could make and how curriculum could be different. And some of what the literature tells us, of course, we know that males of color in school continue to experience marginalization, silencing, etc. And these young students who were with us in the TCL, in the curriculum lab, are experiencing great levels of academic, of institutional failure, right? The institution is failing them. They experience it, they know it, they can name it. And of course, these young people come from generations of generations who have also been marginalized and silenced and bruised and wounded by schooling. So it was a really important opportunity for my students to also, for the university students, to also see that these are not, we construct these students in particular ways, and to understand that we can create curriculum that actually brings out their knowledge, that highlights their knowledge, that places them as central to their experience, which is another element of Testimonio. And so pedagogically, we were rooted in Testimonio. How do we get these students to see their experiences, to highlight them, to center them, to bring them in as a way to illuminate their knowledge and to change the epistemologies of schooling as well. And so the roots of this and the critical Chicana and Black feminism that was sort of at the root of the ethic of care that we used in working with them comes from, of course, legacies of Black and Chicana, Latina community educators that we saw in interesting places. So in New Mexico, we had segregated schooling for Mexican American students, and that was based on the justification of they don't speak English. So we're going to put them in these low-funded schools, we're going to put them in these places, but they're going to have white English-speaking educators from the East. We're going to bring them in to teach these students to purify them, to make them better and fit for society. So but in some rural places, nobody wanted to teach there. So you ended up with community educators who were Spanish-speaking, Nuevomexicana educators who would teach in these beautiful ways and who would create these spaces of love and uplift and challenge for these students. So there's some research there. There's also some incredible research coming out of the Jim Crow South, where you had segregated schools, Black teachers for Black students, and some scholars that talk about the real shift that came with desegregation, right? And they'll say desegregation was necessary, but we lost our Black educators. And so looking at what it meant when education was constructed as justice and love and uplift versus to as punishment and racism. So when we look at all of that and we see the critical care that is happening in those historicized places and contemporary places where we have educators of color, educators from those very communities, we pull in these Chicana feminist epistemologies because my work brings that in because Chicana feminists remind us that body and land must always be present. And so the Black and, the critical care scholarship that we see, often we can advance that with notions of flesh, with notions of body, with notions of land. And so Chicana feminists bring us into body. And the importance, Sherry Moraga talks about of the descendants of people who have experienced generations of colonization and wounding. Our flesh knows things, right? We carry these things in our chromosomes, and we have to. This has been the place of our wounding, and this can also be the place of our healing. And so, it's essential that students understand that they carry knowledge in their blood, in their cells, and in the places that they're situated. So it gives a body language to critical care that we don't typically see. And so this body, which is historicized and positions oppressed and silenced peoples as philosophers, creators, and knowers. And so we did that, and in placing the students in that position, we saw some incredible things. And so previous work, I did some research in the classroom of high school educators who were teaching predominantly students of color. They were also educators of color. And so what we saw in this high school class is what I came to call an in the flesh, what we came to call an in the flesh ethic of care, which situates body, emotion, grief, shame, rage at injustice, but also hope and love as teachers, healers, cultivating critical consciousness regarding sexism, queerphobia, anti-Indigenous, anti-Black racism, and violence. And the students are communed as a spiritual collective, and they know it, and you can see it. So that was happening in the high school. So we pulled that to be able to operationalize it and say, what happens when you take that into the still white spaces of higher education and teacher education? Because just because we have a majority of students, our curriculum is still so, clinical and separate and still very white. And so this methodology, we utilize the Testimonio methodology to, really to center knowledge, and it's a strength-based methodology that looks at how do these students make sense of their experiences and what stories do they bear that reveal a critical consciousness. So our positionality as to myself and Karina, I call myself a Chicana feminist researcher, Chicana feminist scholar, and Karina is a 21-year-old undocumented immigrant who immigrated to the United States, she says, alongside my parents and brother at the age of 1 from Ciudad Juárez, northern Mexico. She says, yo soy ni de aquí ni de allá. I'm from neither here nor there, right? I call a country home which rejects me and my family as immigrants, and I've had to deny my own home country out of fear of deportation. She says, I've seen my brother experience the very same things that males of color that we see in the research, the very same things that we know. So we both bring this insider-outsider positionality to this research. Our own fathers and uncles and cousins and brothers have experienced this same wounding. And so that informs so much of what we did and how we engage in this space. So I already talked about the setting of this research. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the participants. They were 4 boys who, out of the 20, agreed to participate with us. So we have Jose Zamora. All of these are pseudonyms. But they're just these 4 beautiful black Mexicano boys who are Mexican immigrants, long-standing New Mexican Hispanic young men. One young man who's being raised by his mother, who is British. His father is Hispanic. So there's some complexity there. But overall, these are young men of color. They are also working class boys. And they had this beautiful friendship where they would really love each other, support each other, and they would speak in weaves. They sort of wove their words together. So you'll see on some slides, they kind of, if someone falls silent in sort of some pain of remembrance, another will come. And so it was this beautiful, and I think defies some of how we think of young high school boys. So Jose Zamora, David Flores, who identifies as Cuban, Matthew Rivera, who had Hispanic last name, a Hispanic father, but was raised by his British mother. He says, my British mom is mean, just like all the rest of our moms. They're hardcore, right? He's like, she might be white, but she's like all of our mothers have this element of toughness, right? Rico Garcia, who calls himself Chicano or Hispanic. And they were all seniors at the time. And so we collected these testimonial focus groups, we recorded them, and we asked them questions centering their experience. What was their experience in school? And then what was their experience in the curriculum lab? And so we digitally recorded them. We provided them transcripts to look at them, to think about them, to engage those in conversation. They also created these sketches and these images that helped us understand. We call these visual mappings of their experiences of school. We analyzed these over time, and then Karina joined the research after these had been collected. And so we were able to analyze also in a kind of a multi-layered weaving. So the findings, so we start first with the way that they talk about schooling. And I think it's important to do that because care is in response in real time to those who are in front of us, those who we love, those who we care about, those for whom caring must equal action, right? So what we know, the literature talks about, the educational care of Nell Noddings, for instance, is very white, is very centered in mothering, it's very sentimental, it's very inert. And Chicana feminist caring, Black feminist caring is about, I see these children, I love these children, so now what do I have to do? And it might put you in a place of war. It might put you in a place of contention. It might put you even to talk to these children in ways that might be like, all right, te tienes que pontar pilas, you gotta do this, right? Sometimes it takes us to those tough places, but it's rooted in deep love, right? And so I give you the dimension first because I think I want to center their voices in the experiences that they have and why we need an enfleshed, body-centered caring to respond to this space. Because these 4 young men illuminate a world which they call the dimension, where corporal and intellectual restriction enforce silencing around socio-political realities that they experience, and masks disallow liberatory, connected, humanizing, enlivened spaces that they actually desire, they speak to. So the dimension of schooling, they say, yeah, it's like another world. It's like another dimension. It's true. It's really it's weird. We say that a lot. I had never really thought about that. We're forced to be here. Yeah, that's how it is. It's like a great big feeling. The dome, and I'm going to show you this drawing, the dome of the dimension. It's like once you're on school grounds, and then David, you're not allowed to leave, like a lot of outside information, it's not even brought in. Like, it's like a force field, It's like we're really caged in. There's stuff we can't talk about. He draws a mask. He says, see that little boy? He's all sad going to school. He goes to the dimensions. He has to put his mask on. They say, yeah, you're always having to put your mask on. You always have to be like, everyone's wearing a mask. They pretend that they like you, but the teachers don't really like you. So here's the force field. Here's this little boy having to go into school. He says, this is the dimension. It's this place. It's not like anything else. They said it's like a warp zone. It's like Trump had just been elected. No teacher would talk about it. And you're in a highly immigrant, Mexican-American community, working class. Nobody will talk about it. The teachers won't talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it, right? They say it's inhumanity. The curriculum overpowers us. Sucks to be you. Yeah, the redundancy of school, it's so robotic. They say the machine keeps going no matter what. It just keeps going. Yeah, Jose, it's not your problem. It's not the machine's problem. I'm going to read Matthew's quote here. He says, it even surpasses feelings of grief and your actual physical health. I had major surgery done and left me physically impaired. They only gave me the exact time everybody else got, and I kept emailing, and I said, I can't keep up. I can't. He says, I was physically incapable of doing my work, and nobody helped me. Jose says, we feel, Enrico says, belittled. He says, yeah, belittled. He says, yeah, the force that they put on us, no matter what. So then in talking about what was it like with this, what was it like in the TCL? They say, oh, it was everybody together. It was everybody learning in class. We were the teachers too. We got to be the teachers too. He says, yeah, Testimonio was reading about other people's lives, and David is the one whose family is Cuban. Other living beings, undocumented beings, just like family members. That was fantastic. We got to learn about it. So here's a little bit of the work that the students actually did, and you can see how they meld. They had to pull quotes and then put it with a photo that they themselves took. So they took a picture of them in the field talking with this man. He's an elder in the community. And so they pulled some thinking from an essay that's rooted in Testimonio. So you'll see the Levins Morales talking about what it means to live in an organic learning space. And then they journaled about being, planting seeds of knowledge and allowing them to grow. And then they pull this beautiful, they put that in conversation with, this Audre Lorde. That says caring, and this is the students, right? I wasn't talking to them about critical care. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is not self-preservation, and that's an act of political warfare. Audre Lorde. And so the image on these slides was taken by one of the students, or was found by one of the students, and they used that in their presentation. So it's really important to, another quote, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And so this is the students using their voices, as a Mexican proverb, to speak back amid the institutional oppression that they experience. And so some more photos. And so we, in the TCL, we used, and we never taught, but this was our sort of grounding, an enfleshed epistemology, and this was from an article I wrote several years ago, stitching together knowledge in ways that are akin to how cells communicate as living, breathing, interconnected bits of larger tissue. So that's over here. And then when I asked Jose to describe his drawing of the TCL and what his experience was, he says, this wall, we're all building it together. And all those blocks are bits of our knowledge. It's like us building something together, and each bit is a person's knowledge. So it was this moment where it's wait, did he read that article? And he would say, it's all like this. They just kept, So really the implications of this are how important it is as teacher educators, those of us in higher education, to provide spaces where we can bring in K-12 youth and where they can experience critical care in ways that they do not experience it in their schooling. And it also, it gave me an opportunity to prepare future educators for future classrooms, but for those children who are living now, in high school now, they don't have time to wait for future educators in future classrooms. And so it provided a space of reprieve and a space where they could sort of, we call it a querencia in New Mexico. It's the corner of the bull ring where the bull goes to recover and breathe and sort of find their grounding again. And so it created a querencia for these young men in real time in their lives. So, thank you.